The sterile scent of antiseptic is the perfume of my world. It's a smell I no longer notice, much like the rhythmic, urgent beeping of monitors or the squeak of worn-out Crocs on linoleum floors. They are the background music to a life spent on the edge of death. I'm Dr. Ben Carter, and for the last 12 years, my hands have worked in the liminal space between a catastrophic injury and a life saved, or a life lost. At Chicago General Hospital, the line between the two is often drawn in blood and split-second decisions. Tonight was no different. The November wind howled outside, throwing sleet against the reinforced windows of the trauma bay, a relentless, percussive reminder of the chaos we fought within these walls. My shift had been a typical grinder, a GSW to the abdomen, a construction worker who'd fallen 2 stories, and a particularly nasty motorcycle versus pothole incident. I was suturing the final laceration on the biker's arm, my movements economical and precise, when the overhead speaker crackled to life. Dr. Carter to Trauma 1. Dr. Carter, Trauma 1, ETA 5 minutes. Multi-vehicle MVC on the Aminus 90. Multiple victims, 1 pediatric critical. My hands didn't pause. The final knot was tied, the suture cut. "Thank you, nurse," I said, stripping off my gloves with a practiced snap. The fatigue that had been settling deep into my bones evaporated, replaced by the familiar, cold focus. It's a switch I've had to perfect. Flip it, and the exhaustion, the last argument with my ex-wife, the bill I forgot to pay, it all vanishes. All that remains is the problem, the patient, the puzzle of broken anatomy. I walked into Trauma 1 as the team was already assembling. Nurses checked supplies, the respiratory therapist prepped the ventilator, and residents buzzed with a nervous energy I'd long since lost. I scanned the room, my eyes cataloging every detail. "All right, people, what do we know?" I asked, my voice calm, cutting through the low hum of anticipation. A junior resident, Dr. Evans, a young man still carrying the sheen of idealism, spoke up. "Dispatch says it was a 3-car pileup near the Cumberland exit. Icy roads. 1 driver DOA at the scene. They're bringing us a mother and son from the lead vehicle. Mom has moderate injuries, conscious. The son, they just said he's bad." "Define bad, Evans," I said, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves and a trauma gown. "There's no room for ambiguity here. Unresponsive on scene, GCS of 4, they had to intubate him in the field." A collective stillness fell over the room. A Glasgow coma scale of 4 is perilously close to 3, which is incompatible with life. Intubation in the field meant his airway was compromised, that he couldn't breathe on his own. This wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. The bay doors burst open, and a gust of frigid air swept in, carrying with it the frantic energy of the paramedics. They wheeled the small gurney in, a flurry of motion and shouted reports. 8-year-old male, name's Leo, was a restrained passenger. Major crush injuries to the torso and lower extremities. BP is 60 over palp, heart rate 180 and thready. We've pushed 2 rounds of epi and have 2 large-bore IVs wide open with saline. And then I saw him. Leo, he was so small on that gurney, dwarfed by the tubes and equipment snaking from his body. His face was pale, waxy, and scraped raw on one side, but strangely peaceful. It was the rest of him that was a testament to the brutal physics of the crash. I didn't see a child, I couldn't afford to. I saw a set of vital signs, a list of injuries, a biological machine that was failing. "Let's get him over." On my count, 1, 2, 3, we moved him in a single, fluid motion onto the trauma bed. Immediately my team swarmed him. "I need X-ray in here now, chest and pelvis first. Get the fast scanner. Evans, on me, let's assess." My hands moved over his small frame, pressing, feeling for the telltale signs of internal damage. His chest was unstable, the ribs clearly fractured in multiple places, a flail chest. His abdomen was rigid, distended. Bad. The fast scan confirmed it instantly. The screen showed a dark pool of black around his spleen and liver. He was bleeding out internally, fast. "He's not going to make it to CT," I stated, the words flat and devoid of emotion. He needs to go to the OR right now. Call up, tell them we're coming. Get Oneg blood from the cooler and hang it. Now, push it in. The controlled chaos escalated. Nurses flew in and out. Bags of blood were hung and squeezed to force the life-saving fluid into his veins faster. We were a machine, working against a clock that was ticking down with every weak, rapid beat of his heart. As we prepared to move him, his blood pressure bottomed out. The monitor let out a long, piercing tone. "He's crashing, starting compressions." Evans yelled, his voice cracking. "No," I shoved him aside gently. "Compressions will just make the bleeding worse. Get the internal paddles ready. We're going to have to crack his chest right here." It was a Hail Mary. A thoracotomy in the ER has an abysmal survival rate, but it was his only chance. I took the scalpel. I made the incision. The world narrowed to the small, broken body on my table. We were losing. His pressure wouldn't come up. His heart rhythm degraded from tachycardia to ventricular fibrillation, then to asystole. Flatline. We worked on him, a desperate, futile ballet of medicine and raw effort. But the damage was too severe. The laws of physiology are unforgiving. And then, something happened. In the midst of the noise, the alarms, the shouting, a moment of impossible quiet. For a split second, a single, weak heartbeat registered on the monitor. A ghost. His eyelids fluttered. My head was close to his, listening for breath sounds that weren't there. His lips, blue and cold, parted. He whispered. It wasn't a cry of pain or a call for his mother. It was a faint, dry rustle of air, so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. I leaned closer, my ear just inches from his mouth. "Tell my mom," he breathed, the words fragile like crumbling leaves. The basement door was locked. Then, a final, shallow exhale. He was gone. The monitor confirmed it with its monotonous, soul-crushing drone. I stood there for a second, the world muted. The team was still for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the loss. Then, the training kicked back in. "Time of death," I said, my voice hoarse. I looked at the clock. 23:47. The nurses began the quiet, respectful work of cleaning the room, of disconnecting the machines that had failed. Evans looked pale, shattered. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good work, doctor. Go get some coffee." He nodded numbly and walked away. One by one, the room emptied, until it was just me, the boy, and the lingering scent of blood and failure. I pulled the sheet over his face. But as I stood there, the chaos of the ER faded, and the only thing I could hear was that impossible, final whisper. The basement door was locked. It made no sense. It was random. The delirious final words of a dying brain. It should have meant nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. It felt heavy. It felt like a key to a door I didn't know existed. And in the silent, sterile theater of death, I felt the first crack appear in the armor I had spent 12 years building. The world outside Trauma Bay 1 came back into focus with a dull, intrusive hum. The beeps and whirs of other machines, the distant, muffled overhead pages, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Sounds I trained myself to filter into meaningless background noise were now grating, each one a reminder that life, annoyingly, stubbornly, went on. I peeled off my gloves, dropping them into the biohazard bin with a soft thud. The motion was automatic, a muscle memory honed over thousands of shifts, but my hands felt unsteady, alien. "Tell my mom, the basement door was locked." The words weren't just an echo anymore. They were a current, running under my skin, making the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I looked at the team, Maria quietly stripping the bed, Dr. Evans dictating notes, their faces set in the familiar, grim professionalism of moving on. We'd done our job, we had lost. Now we reset for the next one, but I couldn't reset. The switch in my brain was stuck. My next job was the one I dreaded most, the walk. I pushed through the double doors, the air in the main ER hallway feeling thick and heavy. Every step toward the elevators that would take me to the surgical floor felt like wading through concrete. In my head, I rehearsed the words. We did everything we could. His injuries were too severe. The same sterile, inadequate phrases I'd used countless times. They were a shield for the family and for me. Tonight, they felt like paper. I pulled out my tablet, my thumb hovering over the patient list before tapping on the mother's file. Sarah Jenkins, 34, admitted with a comminuted fracture of the left humerus, multiple lacerations, and a mild concussion. Vitals stable. She was awake, alert, and probably asking for her son. The cold, clinical data did nothing to prepare me. In a way, it was worse that she wasn't critically injured herself. She was lucid enough to feel every ounce of the pain I was about to deliver. I found her in a private room on the 5th floor. The relentless Chicago rain that had slicked the roads for the accident was now just a soft patter against the window, a somber drumbeat. Through the small glass panel in the door, I saw her. Her face was pale, a deep purple bruise blooming on her temple. Her left arm was immobilized in a large, white cast propped up on a pillow. A young nurse was checking her IV drip. I took a deep breath, the sanitized hospital air doing nothing to calm the knot in my stomach. I knocked softly and entered. The nurse looked up, her expression shifting from placid care to knowing pity when she saw me. She knew why a trauma surgeon was visiting a stable patient. I gave her a slight nod, a silent dismissal. She finished her task and slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a chamber being sealed. "Doctor?" Sarah's voice was raspy, laced with an anxiety that was almost tangible. Is Leo okay? They wouldn't tell me anything. They just said he was with you. Please tell me where my son is." Her eyes, wide and pleading, locked onto mine. In them, I saw the terror of a parent suspended between hope and the abyss. And I was the one who had to push her over the edge. I pulled a stool over to her bedside, the movement feeling slow and deliberate. I sat down, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Mrs. Jenkins, Sarah, my name is Dr. Ben Carter. I was the attending surgeon in charge of Leo's care when he arrived. Is he in surgery? Is he going to be okay?" she pressed, her good hand gripping the bedsheet until her knuckles were white. "He's strong, you know. He's such a strong boy." This was the moment, the point of no return. "Sarah," I began, my own voice sounding distant. "There was a multi-system trauma. The impact from the accident was catastrophic. We had a full team, and we worked on him for over an hour. We did everything, absolutely everything, that was medically possible." I watched as the understanding slowly dawned, as the desperate hope in her eyes began to curdle into horror. She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. No, you're wrong. We were just going to get ice cream. He was telling me a joke." Her denial was a physical thing, a shield she was trying to hold up against my words. But my words were a battering ram. "I'm so sorry," I said, the phrase feeling hollow and useless. "We couldn't save him. Leo passed away on the operating table." A sound tore from her throat, a raw, guttural cry of pure agony that the sterile walls of the room couldn't contain. It was a sound I'd heard before, but this time it resonated differently, vibrating through the floor, up the legs of the stool, and into my bones. She crumpled, her body folding in on itself as much as the cast would allow, sobs racking her frame. I sat there, a silent, grim statue. My protocol was to offer condolences, answer any questions, and then leave. Give the family space to grieve, but I couldn't move. The boy's whisper was a deafening roar in my head. "Tell my mom, the basement door was locked." I looked at this shattered woman, her world obliterated in a single sentence, and I felt a desperate, unprofessional urge. I had to know. What did it mean? Was it a key? A confession? A cry for help that had come too late? My mouth opened, but the clinical part of my brain, the part that had kept me sane for 15 years, screamed at me. You do not burden a grieving mother with the nonsensical last words of her dying child. I closed it. Her sobs subsided into ragged, hitching breaths. She looked up at me, her face a mask of tears and despair. Can I see him?" "Of course," I said, my voice thick. "We'll arrange it as soon as you're ready." This was my chance to leave. My duty was done, but my feet were bolted to the floor. I searched for a way in, a subtle question that wouldn't cause more pain. "Is there anyone we can call for you, Sarah?" I asked, the question a standard part of the script, but my motive was entirely different. Leo's father? Grandparents? She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her free hand. His father were divorced. He lives in Portland. My parents are in Florida. Oh, God. The realization that she was truly alone sent a fresh wave of grief over her. My mind raced. No family nearby, no one else in the house. The whisper felt more urgent, more isolated. It was a secret just for her, a secret I now carried. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sarah, I said again, finally rising from the stool. The words were a surrender. I couldn't do it. I couldn't ask. I left her room, the sound of her quiet weeping following me down the hall. I didn't go back to the ER. Instead, I found an empty on-call room, flicked off the lights, and stood in the dark, staring out the window at the glittering, indifferent lights of the Chicago Loop. The rain had stopped. I had delivered the worst news of a woman's life, but I had failed the boy. I held his last words, this strange, heavy key, and I had no idea what lock it was meant to open. All I knew was that I couldn't put it down. The walk away from Sarah Clark's room was the longest of my life. Each step down the muted gray hallway of the family waiting area felt like a failure. The air, usually just sterile and antiseptic, now felt heavy, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words. I had done my job, I had informed the next of kin, but I had failed the boy. The weight of his whispered plea, "Tell my mom, the basement door was locked," was a physical pressure in my chest, a new, unfamiliar kind of ache that had nothing to do with fatigue. I found my way to my office, a small, windowless cube that suddenly felt like a prison cell. The neat stacks of paperwork, the medical journals, the framed diplomas on the wall, they all seemed to belong to another man. A man who could compartmentalize, who could see a case number and not a child's face, who could walk away from a grieving mother without feeling like a coward. I sank into my chair, the worn leather groaning in the silence. I couldn't get the image of Sarah's face out of my mind, the way her expression crumpled, the way her body seemed to fold in on itself as the reality of my words hit her. How could I have possibly looked into those eyes, hollowed out by a pain I could barely comprehend, and asked about a basement door? It would have been an act of cruelty, a grotesque intrusion on the most sacred moment of her grief. The thought made my stomach churn. And yet, Leo's voice was just as present, a faint, desperate echo in the quiet of the room. He had used his last breath to give me a message. He had trusted me. My professional duty had been to his mother, but my human duty felt inextricably tied to him. The two were at war inside me, and the conflict was tearing down every wall I had ever built. My shift had ended hours ago, but the thought of going home to my empty apartment was unbearable. Sleep was an impossibility. I needed to do something, anything, to quiet the storm in my head. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My initial intention was just to review Leo's chart again, to look for some missed detail, some medical anomaly that could explain the bizarre final statement. But I knew there was nothing there. We had documented everything, the crushed chest, the internal bleeding, the desperate, futile measures we took to save him. No, the answer wasn't in the medical chart. The answer was outside these walls, and I had no right to look for it. An idea, insidious and dangerous, began to form. It started as a flicker and then grew into a burning certainty. The accident report, the paramedic run sheet. They were linked to the patient's file in the hospital's integrated system, accessible to attending physicians for continuity of care. But my reasons weren't for continuity of care. This was purely personal. Accessing those files for anything other than direct medical necessity was a cardinal sin, a blatant HIPAA violation that could cost me my license, my career, everything I had worked for. It was a line I'd never even considered approaching, let alone crossing. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the cursor blinking on the login screen. On one side of the scale was my entire professional life. On the other, the face of a dead 8-year-old boy and his cryptic, haunting request. The scale tipped. It wasn't even a choice anymore. It was a compulsion. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated away from my office. The main corridors were quieter now, the organized chaos of the day shift replaced by the hushed efficiency of the night crew. I found a deserted nursing station in a wing that was partially under renovation. The dim light cast long, distorted shadows on the floor. Every distant beep of a monitor, every soft footstep down the hall, sounded like an approaching accusation. I sat at the terminal, the plastic of the chair cold against my scrubs. I logged in with my credentials. My access level was high, I could see almost anything. I typed Clark, Leo into the search bar. His file appeared instantly. I clicked through the tabs, past the lab results and imaging reports, my hands slick with a cold sweat. I found the tab labeled External Documents. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was it, the point of no return. I clicked. A list of PDF files appeared. Chicago PD Preliminary Accident Report. Chicago Fire Department Paramedic Run Sheet. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the police report first. It was dry, bureaucratic, single-vehicle collision. 2018 Honda CR-V driver, Sarah Clark. Passenger, Leo Clark. Time, 1943. Location, a stretch of Lakeshore Drive, miles from any residential area. Cause, preliminary assessment suggests loss of control on rain-slicked pavement. No other vehicles involved. No signs of impairment. I scanned the document, my eyes flying across the text. Then I found it. The home address. A quiet street in Lincoln Park. I memorized it instantly, the name of the street and the number searing itself into my brain. I switched to the paramedics' report. It was more of the same, a clinical description of the extrication, Leo's vitals at the scene, the interventions performed en route to the hospital. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing except the location of the crash. Why were they on that part of Lakeshore Drive at that time of night, so far from home on a school night? It wasn't a crime, not even suspicious to a cop filling out a form. But to me, in the context of a locked basement door, it felt like another piece of a puzzle I couldn't see. I had what I came for. I had the address. I quickly closed the files, cleared the search history, and logged out of the system. I pushed the chair back and stood up, my legs unsteady. Walking back through the silent hospital, I felt different. The guilt was still there, but now it was mingled with something else, purpose. I had broken the rules. I had stepped out of the role of doctor, Carter, and into something new, something undefined and dangerous. I didn't know what I would do with the address, not yet. But as I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the cool, damp Chicago night, I knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about a message. This was an investigation, and it was mine. My next day off felt like a punishment. The sterile silence of my apartment, usually a refuge from the cacophony of the hospital, was now filled with the echo of a child's whisper. I'd tried everything to drown it out. A run along the chilly lakefront until my lungs burned, 2 hours at the gym pushing myself to exhaustion, even an old medical journal I'd been meaning to read. Nothing worked. The words were a ghost limb, an ache where nothing should be. The basement door was locked. I sat on my couch, the gray Chicago sky pressing down on the city, and stared at the address on my phone. 2357 North Orchard Street. Lincoln Park. It felt like a beacon, a dangerous, magnetic pull I was powerless to resist. Every ethical instinct, every rule hammered into me since medical school, screamed at me to delete it, to walk away, to let the dead rest. But Leo wasn't resting, at least not in my head, and I couldn't either. Just a drive-by, I muttered to the empty room, the justification sounding flimsy even to my own ears. Just to see the house, to put a place to the name. That's all. The drive from my South Loop apartment to Lincoln Park was a journey across worlds. The concrete and steel canyons downtown slowly gave way to the manicured, historic elegance of the North Side. The noise of the city softened, replaced by the rustle of autumn leaves on tree-lined streets. Here, immaculate brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder, their windows dark and serene. It was a neighborhood of quiet money and curated lives, a world away from the frantic, bloody reality of my trauma bay. It made the violence of Leo's death feel even more incongruous. I found Orchard Street easily, my heart rate climbing as I slowed my car to a crawl. And then I saw it, 2357. It was perfect, almost painfully so. A 3-story graystone with a polished black door and gleaming windows. A large, perfectly carved pumpkin sat on the top step, a cheerful, mocking grin aimed at the street. There were no signs of tragedy here. No flowers on the doorstep, no visible token of mourning. It was just a beautiful house on a beautiful street, radiating a quiet, domestic peace that felt like a lie. I drove past, circled the block, and found a parking spot half a block down, affording me a clear, if distant, view. I cut the engine, the silence returning heavier this time. I felt like a predator, a stalker. What was I doing here? What did I expect to find? A for sale sign? A boarded-up basement window. I saw nothing but stoic, brick-and-mortar normalcy. For 20 minutes, I just sat there, feeling the full weight of my transgression. This was madness. I was a surgeon, not a detective. My place was in the OR, not staking out a grieving family's home. I was about to start the car, to retreat back to my world and try to forget, when the black door of 2357 opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, in his late 40s, dressed in expensive casual clothes that looked rumpled, as if he'd been sleeping in them. His face was etched with exhaustion. Leo's father, I presumed. He didn't go anywhere. He just stood on the top step, running a hand through his dark hair, staring at nothing. He looked less like a man grieving and more like a man cornered. Then, a sleek black sedan, a Mercedes, pulled up directly in front of the house. It didn't parallel park, it just stopped, imposing and aggressive. A man in a tailored dark suit got out. He was sharp, severe, carrying a thin leather briefcase. He walked up the steps with a purpose that was anything but sympathetic. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. The body language was a shout. Leo's father straightened up, his posture immediately defensive. The man in the suit spoke first, his gestures short and clipped. He wasn't offering condolences, he was making demands. The father shook his head, his hands held up in a placating gesture that the suited man completely ignored. The conversation was brief, brutal, and one-sided. Then, the suited man opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and thrust it into the father's hands. He said one last thing, leaning in close, his expression cold and final. Without a handshake, without a nod of sympathy, he turned, walked back to his car, and drove away. Leo's father stood frozen on the porch, staring down at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His face wasn't one of sorrow. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. He glanced up and down the street, his eyes paranoid and wide, and for a terrifying second, I thought he'd seen me. But his gaze passed over my car without registering. He clutched the envelope to his chest and quickly retreated inside, the heavy black door clicking shut with an air of finality. I sat in my car, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath catching in my throat. The quiet, peaceful street suddenly felt menacing. The perfect house seemed to hold its breath, guarding a secret far darker than a simple, tragic accident. I had come here looking for an answer, for something to quiet the ghost of a little boy's whisper. Instead, I had found a new, terrifying question. This wasn't about a locked door anymore. It was about what or who was on the other side of it. The drive back from Lincoln Park was a blur of traffic lights, and the rhythmic thump of his wipers against a persistent Chicago drizzle. The image of Mark Hayes's face, pale, terrified, utterly broken, was seared into Ben's mind, overwriting the sterile, procedural memories of the operating room. That wasn't the face of a grieving father receiving condolences. It was the face of a man being cornered by a predator. The man in the suit, with his rigid posture and the cold finality of the envelope he delivered, was that predator. Sleep was a distant luxury. Food was an afterthought. The gnawing need for answers had become a physical ache, a pressure behind his sternum not unlike the kind he'd spent his career trying to relieve in others. He couldn't go home. His small, quiet apartment would feel like a cage, leaving him alone with the spinning gears of his obsession. So he drove back to the one place that felt like an extension of himself, the hospital. He badged through the staff entrance, nodding to the night security guard. "Just checking on the MVA from yesterday," he mumbled, a plausible lie that tasted like ash in his mouth. The hallways were quieter now, the controlled chaos of the day shift replaced by the hushed, diligent hum of the night crew. It was a perfect cloak. He found an empty on-call room in the surgical wing, a small, windowless space with a cot, a desk, and a computer. The air was stale, thick with the smell of disinfectant and old coffee. He sat down, the worn vinyl of the chair groaning under his weight. For a moment, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse. This was the point of no return. Accessing a police report was a fireable offense. Using hospital resources to conduct a private investigation into a patient's family was career suicide. He thought of Leo. He thought of the boy's last, desperate whisper. He clicked the mouse. He already had the name, Mark Hayes, and the address. He started with the basics, a simple search. The first few results painted a picture of predictable, upper-class success. A LinkedIn profile for Mark Hayes, principal architect at the Hayes Design Group. Photos of sleek, minimalist homes he'd designed. An article in a local lifestyle magazine featuring the family's perfectly curated Lincoln Park brownstone. It was a facade, Ben knew, as meticulously constructed as the buildings Mark designed. He dug deeper, modifying his search terms. Mark Hayes lawsuit. Mark Hayes debt. The initial results were thin, mostly legal minutiae related to building permits and zoning disputes. He was about to abandon the search, feeling the first prickle of foolishness when he changed tactics. He focused on the business itself. Hayes Design Group bankruptcy. The screen flooded with results. It was all there, a story from about 18 months ago. The Hayes Design Group had quietly filed for Chapter 11 protection. Articles from the Chicago business journals detailed a swift and brutal collapse. The firm had over-leveraged on a series of ambitious condo developments in the West Loop. Projects that stalled and then died when a major source of funding was abruptly pulled. The language was dry and corporate, but the subtext was clear. Ruin. Ben's pulse quickened. He scanned an article from Crane's Chicago Business, his eyes catching on a key paragraph. The collapse was triggered when its primary financial partner, Croft Capital Investments, called in its high-interest loans, citing contractual breaches. The move, described by one insider as unusually aggressive, left the Hayes Design Group insolvent almost overnight. Attempts to reach Croft Capital for comment were unsuccessful. Croft Capital Investments. The name felt cold, sharp. Ben opened a new tab, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He typed the company name into the search bar. The first result was a slick, minimalist website with a roster of its executive team. And at the top of the page, under the title of CEO and founder, was a corporate headshot. Ben stopped breathing. It was him. The same severe, angular face. The same impeccably tailored suit. The same cold, dark eyes that seemed to absorb all light and reflect nothing. The name under the photo was Julian Croft. The predator now had a name. It all snapped into place with a horrifying clarity. Mark Hayes hadn't just lost his business. He was indebted to this man. A man who didn't seem like the type to forgive a debt. The envelope wasn't a sympathy card. It was a demand. A threat. The accident, happening so far from their home, was it a warning? A message sent in the most brutal way imaginable. Suddenly, a little boy's fear of a locked door didn't seem so random. Ben leaned back, the harsh fluorescent light of the on-call room feeling like an interrogation lamp. He was no longer just a surgeon haunted by a patient's last words. He had stumbled out of the sterile, ordered world of medicine and into a dark, violent reality of debt and fear. He was holding a piece of a puzzle he was never meant to see, and the face of Julian Croft on the screen felt like a direct warning. He now knew that Leo's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a consequence. The name sat on my laptop screen like a spider in the center of a web. Julian Croft. My apartment, usually a sterile sanctuary from the chaos of the ER, felt like a bunker. The distant wail of a siren snaking through the Chicago night was a familiar sound, but tonight it felt like a warning aimed directly at me. It was 3 a.m., the city was asleep, but I was wide awake, fueled by stale coffee and a gnawing dread that had replaced my exhaustion. My search started with the official channels. Croft Capital Investments was a legitimate, registered entity with a sleek corporate website full of jargon about synergistic growth and strategic acquisitions. There were press releases, photos of Croft shaking hands with city officials, a carefully curated image of a powerful, respectable businessman. But it was too clean, too polished. It felt like a facade, and I needed to see what was behind it. I started digging deeper, using more obscure search terms, diving into financial forums and archived news articles from smaller business journals. That's when the cracks began to show. A local Chicago business blog from 2 years ago detailed the aggressive restructuring of a beloved local restaurant chain. The anonymous comments below the article told the real story. They were bled dry by their investor, one user wrote. The owner had a mysterious accident on his boat a month later. Another post on a forum for struggling entrepreneurs warned newcomers to stay away from a lender they only referred to as JC. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. A promising business given a generous line of credit, followed by impossible demands, a swift and hostile takeover, and complete financial ruin for the founders. The stories were scattered, separated by years and different industries, but the architect of the destruction was always the same. Croft didn't just bankrupt people, he obliterated them. He used their own ambition as a weapon, waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability before pulling the trigger. The fear I saw on Mark Hayes' face wasn't just about losing his business. It was the terror of a man who understood he'd made a deal with a predator, and that his family was the collateral. And then it hit me, a realization so cold and sharp it felt like a scalpel blade to the chest. Leo's car crash wasn't a warning. It was the consequence. Croft had already delivered his message. Mark had likely defaulted or tried to push back, and Croft had responded with an act of calculated, unimaginable cruelty. The envelope I saw him deliver wasn't a threat. It was likely the next set of instructions, twisting the knife in a wound that would never heal. Mark was trapped, silenced by grief and terror. Leo's last words echoed in my mind, no longer a cryptic puzzle but a desperate, vital clue. Tell my mom the basement door was locked. Why the basement? What was down there? Was it where Mark was forced to conduct his business with Croft? Was there evidence hidden there? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever it meant, the message was for Sarah. She was the one Leo wanted to know. She was the one who was still in the dark, mourning a tragic accident while living in the same house as the man whose actions had led to her son's death, under the shadow of the monster who'd ordered it. My professional detachment, the wall I had spent a decade building, was gone. It hadn't just been breached, it had been leveled. I was no longer a doctor observing a tragedy. I was involved, implicated by the secret I carried. Going to the police was a dead end. My evidence was a flimsy chain of illegally accessed files, late-night internet searches, and a gut feeling. They'd see a grieving, unstable surgeon projecting a conspiracy onto a family tragedy. Croft was insulated by lawyers and money, untouchable. I was the only person who held all the pieces. I stood up and began to pace the narrow confines of my living room, the city lights of the Gold Coast flickering below. I had to tell her, I had to give her Leo's message. But how? I couldn't just show up at her door. Mark might be there, a puppet dangling from Croft's strings. Or worse, Croft might have someone watching the house. Approaching her directly could put her in even greater danger or get me killed. An anonymous note? Too easily dismissed as a cruel prank. A phone call? She'd hang up on a stranger talking nonsense about her son's death. I needed to see her face, to speak to her in person, to convey the gravity of the situation with the sincerity she deserved. I needed a neutral ground, a public space where she would feel safe, where we wouldn't be easily observed. My mind raced back to the police report. It listed Leo's school, the Francis W. Parker School, right in Lincoln Park. A place of routine, of normalcy. Did she still go near there? Maybe to a nearby park to feel close to him, or a coffee shop she used to frequent with him after school. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. My plan formed, cold and clear, a clinical procedure for a problem with no clean incision. I couldn't just approach her. I had to find her first. I would have to watch her, learn her routine, and find the right moment. A quiet morning in a park, a brief moment alone at a cafe. The idea of it, of tailing a grieving mother, felt like a profound violation. It was the behavior of a stalker, not a surgeon. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting Leo's last words fade into silence while his mother remained in danger, was unthinkable. It was a betrayal I couldn't live with. I shut the laptop, the screen going dark. The reflection that stared back was a stranger. Haggard, haunted, his eyes filled with a grim purpose that had no place in an operating room. My shift didn't start for another 8 hours, but the thought of sleep was impossible. I grabbed my keys and my coat. I was going to Lincoln Park, not to the Hayes house, but to the world around it. My vigil was starting now. The next morning, a brittle Chicago wind whipped off the lake, rattling the bare branches of the trees in Lincoln Park. I sat in my car, a block from the Hayes brownstone, nursing a lukewarm coffee and a knot of anxiety in my stomach. This was it, the culmination of a promise made to a dying boy, a promise that had unraveled my life. When Sarah emerged from the house, she was a solitary figure swallowed by a heavy coat. She walked with no destination in mind, her steps slow, her gaze fixed on the cracked sidewalk. I gave her a half-block lead, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I followed her into the sprawling quiet of the park. She eventually settled on a cold, isolated bench overlooking the frozen surface of the South Pond. The city's skyline stood like a distant, indifferent witness. It was as public a place as I could hope for, yet felt profoundly private. This was my chance. My throat went dry. Every instinct I had as a physician screamed at me to leave this grieving woman alone, but the memory of Leo's faint whisper was a stronger imperative. I got out of my car and approached slowly, my shoes crunching on the gravel path. "Mrs. Hayes," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Sarah," she looked up, her eyes vacant with grief, a flicker of confusion in them. She didn't recognize me. "My name is Dr. Ben Carter," I began, my hands feeling clumsy and exposed at my sides. I was the surgeon who treated Leo at the hospital." Her expression shuddered instantly. A wall of pure, unadulterated pain went up. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy, brittle like the frozen leaves skittering across the path. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I know this is an impossible time," I said, forcing myself to hold her gaze. "But there's something I have to tell you. It's the reason I'm here. Just before he passed, Leo said something. He asked me to tell you." Her posture changed. The defensive anger softened into a desperate, heartbreaking focus. She leaned forward, her entire being concentrated on me. "What?" she breathed. "What did he say?" I took a steadying breath, the cold air burning my lungs. The words felt heavy, sacred. He whispered, "Tell my mom the basement door was locked." I delivered the line and braced myself for anything, confusion, anger, dismissal. I did not expect what happened. Sarah's face didn't register shock. It crumpled. A low, guttural sob escaped her, a sound of such profound agony that it felt like a physical blow. The mystery wasn't a mystery to her at all. It was a confirmation of a horror she hadn't allowed herself to name. "Oh God," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "Oh my baby, he knew." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, and the entire story poured out of her between ragged breaths. Julian Croft had been at their house that morning. He'd come to collect, his presence filling their home with a cold, predatory menace. Mark, paralyzed with fear, had been trying to protect their son. "Mark told Leo to go to his room and hide," she choked out. "But Leo, he was so protective of me." Mark was terrified Leo would come downstairs, that Croft would see him, use him. So he took him to the basement. He told him it was a game, and he locked the door. He thought it would keep him safe, just for a few minutes, just until Croft was gone. My blood ran cold. The locked door wasn't a metaphor, it was real. Leo must have gotten out, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. He was always so clever with locks. He must have heard the shouting. He must have been scared and he got in the car. To run away, to find help. Mark and I didn't even know he was gone until the police called. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Mark's terror on the porch. The car crashed so far from home. Croft wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a monster who terrorized families in their own homes. And Mark, in a desperate, misguided attempt to shield his child, had inadvertently set the stage for the tragedy. Leo's last words weren't a fever dream. They were his final, desperate attempt to explain. I was locked in. I was scared. That's why I was in the car. And then the final, chilling piece fell into place. The accident itself. Was it truly an accident? Or was it a final, brutal message from Croft to Mark? A demonstration of what happens when you can't pay? A child's life as collateral damage. I sat down on the bench beside her, the professional distance I'd spent my career cultivating completely gone. I was just a man sitting next to a mother whose world had been destroyed. Sarah, I said, my voice firm but gentle, this is more than just Mark's debt. What Croft did, coming to your home, threatening your family, that's a crime. The fear he caused is what led to Leo being in that car. He is responsible. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. But what can we do? It's his word against ours. Mark is terrified. He blames himself. He's not alone anymore, I said. I saw Croft at your house. I saw the look on Mark's face. I can be a witness. You can be a witness. And Mark can tell them the truth. Not just about the debt, but about everything. For the first time since Leo's death, a flicker of something other than grief appeared in Sarah's eyes. Resolve. We didn't go to the nearest precinct. I knew a detective, a good man named Miller whose son I'd operated on years ago. We met him in a quiet coffee shop far from Lincoln Park. As Sarah, with my support, laid out the whole sordid story, I saw Miller's expression shift from professional sympathy to grim focus. He knew Croft's name. Months have passed. The Chicago winter has given way to a tentative spring. From my office window, the city lights sparkle with the same indifference, but for me, everything has changed. The federal investigation into Julian Croft and his company is front-page news. With an immunity deal in exchange for his testimony, a broken and guilt-ridden Mark Hayes gave the prosecution everything they needed. Croft's empire of fear is beginning to crumble. Sarah moved to Wisconsin to be with her sister. She sent me a card last week. It just said, "Thank you." It's sitting on my desk right now. The silence in the trauma bay no longer feels haunted. The ghosts have been laid to rest. I couldn't save Leo's life on my operating table, but I honored his final wish. I delivered his message. And in the process of seeking justice for a boy I barely knew, I found a piece of myself I thought was gone for good. The piece that remembers that behind every injury, every case, there is a human story that deserves to be heard.